Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Today's podcast, we're going to be discussing a little bit of a controversy. There's some news that came out about KPMG having some difficulties in the UK. In the UK, KPMG is being sued over their audit of Carillion. And this seems to be the accounting scandal that won't die. I mean, this Carillion thing has lasted for years now. And what happened was KPMG signed off on Carillion's financials in 2017. And then 5 months later, Carillion went out of business. Now, the government agency in charge of reviewing the Carillion bankruptcy is suing KPMG for £250 million. And the government's reasoning for the amount is that the company paid out £250 million in dividends and advisory fees between 2014 and 2016. And they did this because they relied on financial statements that KPMG signed off on. And it turns out that the way that the company accounted for contracts and goodwill was incorrect. KPMG should have been able to spot those incorrect methods according to the lawsuit. And the accounting methods used by Carillion were labeled as aggressive. And that is why KPMG is being held to a higher standard, because they should have been able to push back on this aggressive accounting, and they should have found out how much the company was really worth. And as part of the lawsuit, officials will be looking through KPMG's audit work, and KPMG's lawyers said that this is highly unusual and that the government should only look through the company's internal documents. And by the company, they mean Carillion. And this isn't a good sign for KPMG or any accounting firm, because it is easy to tear apart an accounting firm's work papers because of most of the time they're just recalculating math that a system already performs. Basically, they're reperforming math that's done in Excel, and there's just tons and tons of work papers, whether it's hard copy or electronic, because that's a partner's dream, is to have the staff go through stuff and just tick and tie stuff. But when you get your audit work papers reviewed, whether it's by a regulator or in a lawsuit, and it's related to accounting principles, like you better have memos on file that shows how you looked at the accounting principles that the company used, and you show how they were in line with industry standards, or how you pushed back on the company and you did some work over the principles that they used, and you have to have a conclusion as to whether they were good or not. And that's probably why KPMG doesn't want people to look at the work papers, because there's probably not a lot of work papers in there that shows that they pushed back on these accounting principles. Because if they did, they would have discovered this fraud. And if KPMG is unable to show that they performed sufficient work over the accounting principles used by Carillion, then they will be in big trouble. I'm not sure it makes sense for KPMG to be on the hook for $250 million. The company has to be responsible for some of this. It can't be all KPMG's fault. And it seems like the company had no oversight themselves. So that seems more of the issue here, that there was no oversight or review. The accounting department, something was wrong in the accounting department. So it can't be all KPMG's fault, especially during this time period. The bankruptcy of the company will cost taxpayers in the UK over £100 million, including £50 million owed to PwC for the work they did during the liquidation of Carillion. The company went bankrupt while owing banks £1.3 billion and having an £800 million pension deficit. And as far as cash, they only had £29 million left in cash after everything. And from my perspective, I always say that cash is king. If you want to find out the truth about a company, track the cash. If they are doing well, they should have plenty of cash on hand. And if a company isn't holding much cash, then there better be a really good reason for it. It seems to me whenever you have one of these accounting scandals, the company always has no cash. And if the auditors did a little bit of work around cash, even digging into the accounting principles isn't that big of a deal. Just understanding why a quote-unquote successful company has no cash can answer a lot of questions. Because when a company doesn't have cash and they want to report earnings, they get really creative. And accounting scandals like these are going to be happening more and more during COVID-19 and an economic crisis, because people are going to get desperate. They're going to get desperate to stay in business, so they're going to try and show earnings that they don't have and trying to forecast earnings they don't have. And they're going to use tricky accounting principles to do this. So the accounting firms are already having difficult times now, and they need to get really good at auditing right now, because there's going to be people messing around. And the Financial Reporting Council in the UK will also publish a report on their findings regarding KPMG in the summer of 2020. Now, I doubt KPMG will be liable for the £250 million unless the UK wants KPMG to go bankrupt as well, and for them to have proceedings over that bankruptcy. KPMG can't afford to pay millions of dollars to anyone at this point, let alone hundreds of millions of dollars. So I'm sure there'll be some alternative resolution to this, unless the government wants to kick this can down the road for better times. So that's the update for today. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Big Four Accounting Firms. Thanks for listening.